I thought I'd make a video on a topic that I thought was, it's just talking about a memory and experiences that had happened um, many years ago. My mother will be able to remember this. Frankie should be able to. Right now, and for sure 100% my mother's not in any healthy mental state. Her identical twin is representing her like a lawyer. And whoever it is that's ordering my mother's twin to do this is completely contaminating anything to work for the favor of whatever they want them to do. And it's maliciously going after my mother. It's just that they're using the identical twin to devour everything. So, because of all the rapes, of everything that happened, that they got away with, and Sarah Cooper playing mommy over, Frankie and my mother, and playing boss over my mother, and Ken Cooper and Kenneth all participating and wanting control. The last thing my mother ever wanted was Kenneth at the radio station manipulating me and controlling everything my mother had ever done with our family to invest in himself and his own family, claim he's a hero, and sabotage the situation and walk away, and that's what he did. But I think it's important to talk about, when I was a kid, I was, this is my other neighbor. There used to be a neighbor that used to be deaf. The mother and father were deaf, and her name was Melissa Horan, and Horan. Anyway, she was a very nice girl, very protective, very nice. Couldn't ask probably for a better friend, neighbor. And anyway, Julian, whenever there was a blonde-haired guy that was deaf, and he was completely deaf. The wife was like 90% deaf. And she could hear, but she couldn't really hear anything. Like, she had a very minimal, a low amount of hearing. And, but anyway, she didn't know really how, she just knew sign language. The guy that lived there, which was not the biological father, but Melissa's father, but was, the stepdad, was an athlete. He played like professional baseball, professional basketball, and he was on a deaf team, because they have like deaf teams. They have people that are blind or disabled, and they have special organizations where they can place them to specifically play professional sports, and I think get paid for it. That's what he did, and he had a lot of trophies. He had a bunch of trophies in his house, and I remember seeing them. I mean, he had like world championship like trophies. And anyway, Julian, for some reason, I didn't know this, he was always scared of this guy. I don't know why he was always scared of this guy. And Julian, I remember, and we didn't know this, and this is how my mother reacted to it. The neighbor would be out in the front yard, and he couldn't make sound out of his mouth, and he always sounded like he was doing this, like, and he would always sound like that because the guy was deaf, but he would try to sign language to like communicate, but he can't. He was a very athletic person, and I was over there spending the night all the time, good friends with Melissa, and I was always kind of nervous of this guy. But I never, I got along with him pretty much fine. I never had any problems with him at all, or his mom, never did. And I remember like the first few times, probably first 10 times, Julian never wanted to get near this guy. He was always scared. And for particularly only this guy that I could recall that he really made an effort to run away. And the guy would be out in the front yard. And he'd just come out of his house to maybe pick up the newspaper or something, and or come over, walk halfway across the yard, and just to say hello to my mother and my father. And Julian would blast and run underneath the garage, get underneath the car, he would run underneath the car and hide there in front of Melissa. You can ask Melissa this. You can ask probably Melissa this. He used to do this all the time, and I don't know why he would do this, but he would just get real scared, and I remember he would just run underneath the car, and he would just hide there. And you could, when you ran underneath the car, because the SUV, there was more significant room than there is on the car, and he would get underneath there, and he would just look to see if the guy was getting any closer, and we wouldn't understand why. And and I'm not kidding you. Like, even when the guy wouldn't even say hello, and he knew that guy was coming out, Julian would, every time he was in the house, he would either run in the house, but if he couldn't, he'd immediately run underneath the car, and he would just hide there. And I remember going to Julian, like, "What are you hiding there for, Julian?" And he was just looking there, like looking at that guy, like he was scared. Now, I don't know if Julian ever got molested by any of the neighbors, by Medellin when he used to be babysitted over there. I don't know any of that. I don't know if Julian was ever molested or not. If I could tell you this, I was always on the lookout for him, always, to protect him. I mean, I'd always go to Frankie and be like, "Hey, you think something happened to Julian? Is he okay? I want to go check him out." Or I was always like that as a kid. And I even told my mother, because Julian came home with sunken eyes, real bad sunken eyes one day, because Julian used to walk with this Aztec-looking Mexican girl. She looked like she was from the Mayan Incas. Like, straight up, she looked like exactly like the Incas. Like, the Incas and the pyramids in Mexico, like the skin tone and hair, like Mayan jungles. That's exactly what this little girl looked like. And she used to always wear long dresses. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is about their, I think there were, I don't know if they were Christians, but there were some sort of Catholicism, Jesus believers. But they make them where, like, they make sure that the little girls, up until adult or something, can only wear long dresses, and they're not very covered, but they're very formal covered. Anyway, the little girl was always very nice, and she used to walk home every day. They used to walk home together with Julian, and I thought it was just, it looked very adorable. It was her friend, and they used to walk home together. And then she'd walk right before we got to the house, and then sort of walk Julian home. And anyway, I don't know if Julian ever went over there, and there was a guy or someone at that house that could have done something, because Julian was only going to that house for, like, I want to say no more than a year. Where after school, sometimes he would hang out and play, and I think he got babysitted over there a couple of times. Now, I don't know if anyone ever touched Julian. I don't know what went on in that house. We didn't know the family. We just knew they were sort of church-going people. I don't think, Miguel would have raped Julian again, or Julian, or molested, or Diana. I don't think that would have happened, but it's not to say that it didn't. But I think it's important for me to talk about, because when Julian started running underneath the car, it was like a year or two after he was going to Moleans' house. Because Julian only walked home from school for like a year with Moleen, and he was, they hit me in my chest again, and then they're hitting it toward the crucifix, because you want to get away with Ken Cooper and the Cooper white family, huh? Motherfucker. And they used to walk home together. So I think it's important for me to talk about, because I don't know what the circumstances was with that. To this day, you'd have to ask Julian if he ever did. I don't know that he did, but I know that one day he came home and he looked kind of like scared. Like, he looked scared. He looked like like somebody had done something to him and told him not to say anything. And he had real bad sunken eyes. Now, I don't think Raymond Palomo, my dad, ever molested. I don't think he would have ever done that. But I don't know what surprises you're also waiting to tell me. So, and I know he didn't. I was around Julian too often for something like that to happen. And my dad was not a very good, necessarily sneaky person. And, but I know Julian came home one day and he had real deep sunken eyes. And I said, "Hey, what's wrong? You okay?" And I looked over there like I was standing right in front of the doorway, and I looked over there like if somebody did something. And I immediately, when my mom came home, or like a day or two, I told my mother. And I said, "Hey, Julian came home y como tiene los ojos muy oscuros, como algo le pasó." And my mother kind of looked at me and goes, like she was thinking, and she was like, "I don't know if this could have happened. You'd have to ask Julian." I told my mother, and I said, "You okay, Julian?" And this is one of the first times I told Julian, and Julian should be able to remember this. I said, "If anybody touches you, if anybody does anything, make sure you tell me, okay? You tell me or Frankie." And and that was pretty much how it went. So it's not to say that maybe because Frankie got molested and raped by so many times, and my mother knew about it, how my mother's behaving toward toward Julian, if Julian got molested, then that means that my mother would have trained him to get rid of the problem, because she didn't want to investigate the way that she did with Frankie and the way that she did with me. Because remember, she has to keep things going, because Cam Cooper's the one that's going to play daddy over her police officer by sending his platoon of people and saying, "Oh, I didn't know what happened. Oh, I'm going to just lie now." And that's what he did. The Cooper family did that. So I think it's important for me to talk about. I don't know if Julian got molested, but I immediately told Julian. Julian will remember this. He will remember this, because I made it. I didn't say it passive to him because I was very worried about him, because his eyes were sunken in very, very deep, very, very deep. And he stopped going over there. He stopped going over to moleans' house, because they lived at that house for like a couple more years and then they moved. But Julian stopped going to that house. And it could have been because sometimes I would tease him. Be like, "Oh, because it looked like an adorable little kid couple, She, in my opinion, the way that little girl used to walk Julian, she looked like she was always the one that was walking with Julian to, like, protect him. That's the way that it looked like. I'm not kidding you. They were in the same grade, but it looked like she was the one that was, like, protecting him. And he looked very comfortable with her, very comfortable, but she was a very calm person. When you looked at Moleen and you talked to her, I only talked to her a couple of times, just as a kid, because I was so much more older. I was like, "Oh, hi, Moleen, oh, you're Moleen." Oh, she was very calm, very, like, guiding, very guiding. Long, beautiful black hair, like silk, like long, like silk hair, like real tan, but like Mixteca. Like they were like Mixteca, they were like Incas from like Mexico. She could probably play in a movie in the jungles of like the Incas during that time. But her face, the way she looked, but they were very polite. So I know most of her people. The mother, I've seen there and talked to her a couple of times. She had waved to me a couple of times, like I don't know if she was a transgender. I know she used to have a mole. I want to say she used to have like a mole right on her chin or on the side of her cheek. I wouldn't say the side of her cheek. It was somewhere on the lower jaw. She used to have a mole, like a mole on the side of her cheek or on the chin or on the side of the chin. But very nice. The dad that I saw, that guy there, he looked very straight, very formal. He looked kind of like my biological father. And he did. He looked a lot like my biological father. And they were very church-going people. They went to church. Like they were very church-like people. They went to church every Sunday and with the family. And they were they were very church organized with going to, as a family, like to the church and doing like the whole church type of thing. I never saw anyone over there. I may have seen a couple of different people, but it was so vague to me because I never went inside that house, ever went inside the house. I knocked on the door a couple of times to ask for Julian, you know, because dinner was ready or something like that, but I never walked into the house. I went there probably 2 or 3 times at most that I can recall, just, you know, asking Julian because my mom either told me or, you know, it was getting late, you know, but Julian never stayed there until night. If anything, he'd stay there for 30 minutes, for an hour after school, maybe on a weekend. So I think it's important for me to talk about, because if Julian ended up getting molested, some uncle shows up, some Uncle Rear guy shows up and molests him, raped him. I don't think he was raped. I never smelt anything on him that I can recall. I don't recall smelling anything. If it was, it wasn't very powerful. I don't recall smelling anything. It's real vague to me. But I do remember very vaguely looking into Julian's eyes, and he was very scared and nervous, like somebody had done something, or someone had told him don't say anything, like stay quiet, or something like that. And that's kind of why I told my mother immediately. Then she came home, or I said a couple of days, I said, hey, Julian came home from moleans, and I said from moleans he looked very traumatized, like something happened to him. And he just looked like he didn't want to say anything. I don't know what the situation was. So anyway, maybe he wasn't. Maybe he just stopped going over there just because he started making new friends, you know, little kid guy friends. And anyway, I thought it was important for me to talk about, because God forbid that Julian was molested by someone that I don't know, because there's only 2 people I would have ever suspected, because I was around Julian too often. Moleans' house or Joe's house. Joe was 2 houses down, next door to Ivan's house. He went over there a couple of times, and there was always an old man that was always asking for Julian and my dad. And he was, oh, that's Julian. How's Julian doing? And anyway, I thought it was important for me to talk about. Because I don't know if Julian was ever molested, but if he ended up being molested by someone, if he ever, maybe not rape, but just like somebody was doing something to him that was wrong sexually, some sort of sexual molestation, then that would have completely attributed to what my mother started to behave, because she did this to me. And she did this to my brother Frankie. She did it to me, Frankie, the worst, but it's not my mother's fault. I don't blame my mother for abandoning her daughter and not wanting to touch her. I don't find a huge blame on her, because the people around her that are threatening her and the people that are putting the pressure on it are the ones that did it, in my opinion. Because of what I saw and what I experienced. That's what my opinion is. I don't believe my mother was just, I don't give a shit, here's the dead body, you know, Sarah Cooper became the Madison Angel, you know, like, she wasn't like that. It was very disturbing to me, though, that my mother came home when I was, you know, she was cooking, and she only went over there a couple of times, and she didn't want to go back over there, because I would go play an Ivan, and I'd be on the front porch, and Ivan was on the front porch playing with me, Ninja Turtles. My mother was coming home to tell me that lunch was ready, and she just looked away from the little. She just looked at the little girl and looked away, and she was just like didn't care. And this is when Ivan told me, and he was kind of cringing a little bit. He said, "I don't think your mother cares." And I want to say he said this more than once, but he wasn't mad. It was more like, well, I got to take the responsibility now. You know, like his dad was telling him that he needs Like, I don't know what information he knows about his dad and what that family was like inside with him and his dad. I really don't know any of that. But I think it's important for me to talk about, because if Julian was molested and I don't know about it, like just touched him or whatever, that plays a huge part as well. Obviously, this is 35 years ago. If Frankie got molested raped by 10 homosexual men, then what happens? Why is it that my mother never would have told you? Why is it that my mother would have never told you, Hector and Frankie, both my sons, who got viciously raped in Mexico? Did my mother ever tell you that before you gave her the Dream Makeover's house? Now, I already said this. I'm not pissed off. I don't care about someone else spending the money on it. What I do care is the fact that I was burnt to the fucking ground, and everything I ever did and sabotaged because they wanted to spend their money and buy me off and buy Frankie off and buy my mother off. This wasn't to necessarily put my mother in a better house. This was to cover up Michael Jackson and have their sexual rapes and whatever they wanted to make for the gay community. That's what that was for. It wasn't for anything else. And because Ken Cooper's in charge of my mother, and Sarah Cooper is, and all that, that's how they played the platoon. Just like to this very day, they're playing platoon leader for Sarah Cooper. That's what they're doing. So I think it's important for me to talk about, because did my mother ever tell you that I was raped with Frankie, also with my uncle, my mom's brother? Not my mom's brother, my dad's brother, Uncle Robert. Did they ever tell you that? Because there's pictures of Sarah Cooper that I've seen before. They used to go over to Uncle Robert's house, and Kenneth is in that house as an infant, and I've seen pictures of that. So I think it's important for me to talk about, because, Uncle Robert, who viciously raped me and Frankie as kids, did my mother ever say that? I think Frankie would have said something. I don't know if Frankie would have said, he had to have. I don't know. I don't think Frankie would have felt more comfortable. Why is it that Frankie didn't say that I was molested, and why is it that Frankie said, I'm going to tell you the sexual molestations without telling me about it? It is a very big violation, because you want him to pay for it and say, you want him to pay for my rapes. That's what you wanted to do, because it was both of us. So, did he ever say that he was raped by the same guy from Mexico, Tio Yeye or Uncle Jacobo, or whatever his name was, that showed up to our house afterwards, after the trip to Mexico? Did he ever, because he molested and raped me in that house very quickly when I was there. He molested me, I know that for sure. I remember that. But did he ever rape or touch Frankie? Did he ever do that? Because I talked about this in my other video. My dad came out of his room and he saw that he was walking in Frankie's room and he was having a sex look. And my dad kind of shooed him off, like, no, we don't do that. And my dad was like, we want that guy to leave. I need that guy to leave. So I think it's important for me to talk about, because I don't know if Julian ever did. I just know that I was very protective, always told him to tell me or Frankie if anybody ever touched him. And me and Frankie had a conversation about it when we were younger. And I told Julian, if anybody ever touches Julian or touches me, make sure, him to tell me, or, to make sure he tells you, okay? And we made that conversation very clear several times. So I think it's important, because if Julian got molested at some point and didn't want to say anything, then she would have attributed to that. So, and I don't blame her. Like I said so many times, I don't blame her. It's the people that are controlling her, and they're using her twin to sabotage it. So they're using her own twin to cutthroat my mother, to then go after whatever else that they wanted, the money, my dad's death, and the house and everything, and then spend their money and all their money to then buy the house. That's what they did. So you make your story whatever you want that to be, but that's my point of view of it. Is Julian is, because if he did, then it plays a huge role Even if it was just once. I was around Julian too often and nothing like that could have happened, but there was one person that would, may have touched him or molested him or raped him in any kind of way that I don't know about, then that means that it would have played a role. It would have played a role, because how my mother behaved in that house. And he obviously lived in the house and met his identical twin. Well, I can tell you this, after this loss of Sarah Cooper and her family taking control, manipulating me and Julian and my mother to that degree, it is such a personal vengeance toward my mother. It is the highest level of disrespect, the highest level of agony, the highest level of bitch. You ever seen two women fight each other? Like when a woman actually gets violent with another woman and she gets near her baby and she starts literally swinging, and she's not a fighter. You ever seen a woman or mother do that before? That's exactly what my mother would have been doing to Sarah. Like that is I'm telling you that, like my mother did not like Sarah. There was no comfort. I want you to stay the fuck away from my kids. There's no much more disrespect that you could have done. The fact that Kenneth did this to me and that's her son, that's her kid, as much as they put all the pain onto me, which they're doing and they're trying to do, they did this to my mother, and then they squandered her by giving her money and petting her like a little dog to make sure they get away with it. So you can do what you want, you can say what you want, but that's what I have to say. Why Julian used to run underneath that truck, our SUV, and my dad didn't like that. My dad saw that several times, and my dad, I remember kind of looking over at this blonde-haired guy and looking at him like what the hell, what's going on? And that's how my dad was. I remember, because he used to run underneath the car all the time, and I don't know, we wouldn't know why. He would just get out of his house. He would hear the door open and close, and the screen door, and he would just run underneath there, and he was in the direction of moleans house or whatever. So he's always thought this guy was like a monster. But eventually after him doing that 6 or 7 times, the deaf guy tried to calm Julian down, and he was like, no, it's okay, it's okay. We don't know why he was always scared of that guy. But anyway, I thought it was worth the conversation. I never had any problems. I'm not saying that there's a hunch to say anything. I don't think he did. I think Julian was just really scared of him because he was deaf. And he did the robot thing a couple of times, and Julian was always scared of that guy because he did have very piercing eyes. And he was a very, very athletic giant. I mean, he was 6'2", I want to say. He was 6'2", and built like an athlete. I mean, he was built like, he was very built. He could play basketball very good. He was professional, professional baseball player too. He used to go bowling all the time. But anyway, I thought I'd make a video. It would definitely play a role. Y'all have to find out if anybody ever touched him or did anything, because I'm sure y'all have already figured that out. But he used to run underneath. That's the only hunch that makes me think now, is that maybe somebody did something to him and he just particularly got scared of this guy when it was someone else. But I can never express enough that, man, that is the highest level of disrespect that I can never express what Sarah was doing to my mother. It's such a deep it's such a personal knife against my mother that it's hard to describe. I feel agony for my mother. I feel agony, almost kind of like a cry, agony for her, what a worthless bitch to do that to you. I'm sorry that this piece of shit garbage and Ken Cooper and Kenneth did this to you. She knows that my mother knows that I did everything I could. She knows, but she also knows that my character, I was just jumping into snakes and I got poisoned. And, but aside from me, They know better. All that family, they knew better. They knew better. That is the ultimate, because you got to understand, that pile up of shit that Sarah Cooper and Kenneth did to my mother and me, they're throwing all that at me thinking that they're not doing this to my mother to get away with it. As much as it harmed me in every way that I'll never get my life again and there's no justice, they did this to my mother at a very personal level, because all you did was the person that was spitting at her and telling her, calling her a bitch, was now you're getting a forgiveness story. That's what you're doing. Because every phone call was nasty, every contact was nasty. There was nothing good about this. It was not because it was just female drama. That was not the reason. Sarah wanted control over my mother like her was her bitch. She just wanted to manipulate and abuse my mother and degrade her. That's all that she wanted. There was, I control this because you're married to my dad. I tell you what to do. As much as it was so harmful to me, it's to my mother at the deepest cores. Having Sarah Cooper show up the day that I was at the hospital, I could never express what that is, what that did to my mother. I think that was probably, that to me, Kenneth and the Cooper family doing that to me, that was the ultimate. Now you just killed, now you're just going to go take care of my son, and you know better and you're not talking about it, and you're doing it with Kenneth and Kenneth's Cooper, and then you show up to take care of me. She didn't really take, she just stayed there and not make sure I didn't die. That is, to my mother, that is, I don't know, because my mother doesn't care about the possessions of money. She cares about her kids and what she went through. That is the highest white dominance of white supremacy that they did against my mother. And it was Kenneth at the radio station that led that whole situation. And falling back on it, it was that they worked as a team together doing that. But guess what? Because in the reality of it, look how good they're having on Christmas Day with their guns, because guess who was doing the shooting? Julian has no fucking idea about what these two just did. And Sarah Cooper here knew that Frankie was getting raped along with Kenneth. And now my mother, the president gave the orders, who's the hero, and they're squandered by mother. I have no control over that.